We are so happy that everyone is here with us today. I especially like to thank our panelists for finding the time. As was mentioned in the previous panel by Cameron, I think, we work hard at our jobs for years and decades, and then it seems in a span of weeks, history unfolds before our eyes, and the purpose, the meaning of our service takes on a whole new light. So thank you so much for your service and for participating today. Let's dive right in and talk about 5G use cases. Let's start there. I'd like to ask everyone on the panel their thoughts on what are some of the interesting use case examples or experiences around building out 5G networks and wireless innovation, and if any of those use cases have brought unintended consequences, both good and bad. Maybe let's start with Jason from Ericsson.
Sure. Let's see. From a surprise standpoint, when I think about what's possible with 5G now that maybe I didn't expect 5 years ago. I mean, we've been building out, planning for 5G for a long time, but now that it's here and it's real, and thanks to partners like Intel and AT&T, we're seeing this spread all over the country very quickly. But there's kind of, I'd say, 4 key things that I wouldn't have expected 5 years ago. Speed, size, sustainability, and security. Now, when I say speed, you're probably thinking, oh, the speed of the network. No, we knew it was going to be fast. We expected it to be fast, and it is. But the speed of development has transformed really the telecom industry and what we do. And we've kind of transformed into not just a hardware company, but a software company as well. So it used to take, a year in between major release cycles. Then that got shortened to a quarter. Then that got shortened to a week. Sometimes now it's every couple of days. In our CI/CD pipeline, we have customers that expect an agile workflow there. So that really has been a change in how we approach developing products and getting them out to market quickly.
And to what do you attribute that unexpected acceleration?
Well, the prevalence of software there, and yeah, really that's kind of the combination of the way the network is architected. Thanks to the 3GPP architecture there, it's a service-based architecture that allows us to get kind of more creative and push things out to the edge. So that's what's accelerated some of that pace. The size has been kind of surprising as well too. Now, the old trope was you pull out your phone and say, I can fit a data center worth of compute power in this phone. But it's not the size of the phones that are surprising now, it's the size of literally the network. I remember my first data center back with AT&T when I was at Bell Labs. It was literally the size of a warehouse. And not a small warehouse, a big warehouse. And now we have the capability to not just have a cell on wheels, or a cow, but to have a core on wheels. So our cows are transforming as well. So we can actually put an entire core on the back of a Humvee, for example, and send it out into the field. So previously we've thought of, well, how can we get, like you talked before about the lack of coverage areas? Well, how about just put a core there instead, not just the cell capability? So that allows us now to think about moving into untrusted environments, kind of bring your network with you type of applications. So that's really transforming things. The sustainability factor in previous generations, as you go from 2G to 3G to 4G, it's more and more power hungry because we're trying to get it, faster, longer range, better capability. And in the past, that meant more power. But with 5G, actually, it's remarkably more efficient from an energy consumption perspective. So this is actually enabling our carriers to kind of move in a positive direction towards their carbon neutral footprint goals, thanks to 5G.
Because of the shorter distances that.
Well, actually, it's so that part of it has to do with the chips themselves. The chips are far more power efficient. The radios and the basebands are more power efficient. We're able to do more things in software rather than just purely through ASIC-driven power amplifiers. We still have the need in some cases, like for a massive MIMO unit with, that obviously does take a lot more power. We're doing beamforming there, but it allows us a lot more flexibility with the cell to get more efficient gains from it.
Save that thought on sustainability, because we'll definitely come back to that in a bit. But I noticed that one of the things that you didn't say in terms of unexpected consequences was greater vulnerabilities. You hear so much about a greater threat vector, greater threat surface.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been the case?
Well, actually, there's been the fourth thing I said was security, and it's a positive aspect of that. 5G is the most secure wireless technology we've ever had, and I think if I'm being honest, it is better from that standpoint than I would have expected in that 5 years ago timeframe, based on what we've been able to bring to market with technology like slicing. That really opens up a new way of handling the network, of parsing out the data, of being able to put security applications closer to the end user, even all the way down to the radio unit itself. So that's actually been a positive change. Yes, it also means that the threat surface is expanded because we just have so many more endpoints, but we have a lot more capability to deal with those threats now. So there's a pro and con trade-off there.
Well, of all the things I've heard today, that is something that's very much a take-home observation, because you, Jason, with your title as the head of security end-to-end, that to me sounds like a title that is very much connoting that the buck stops with you. So if you say the security is good, I think that's a good observation. So let's bring in Vincent into the conversation about unintended consequences, unexpected consequences of building out the 5G, both good and bad. Do you have anything you would care to add about this from your perspective from CISA?
Certainly from as you mentioned, like a use case perspective, first and foremost, CISA is one of the leaders within 5G within DHS, both with regards to supply chain and development and policy. Within CISA, the Emergency Communications Division, which I am part of, it's really about, the mission space there is really about interoperable, secure, resilient, and priority communications for critical infrastructure, national security, and public safety. As we know, the comms and emergency communication situations, have to work first time all the time. 5G has really brought a lot of capability to the table with regards to our first responders, our national security and public safety partners. But as has already been discussed, with that capability, whether it's the low latency, whether it's that multiple, MIMO, whether it's the massive information flow, visualization, things of that nature, what comes with that are potential vulnerabilities. So a use case would be, especially in cybersecurity and resiliency, would be, as we move from traditional land mobile radio, and we'll always be in land mobile radio, don't get me wrong, but as we start looking at broadband, as we start looking at the IP systems that run dispatching and things of that nature within emergency communications, we're starting to open up potential vulnerabilities, because now, unlike voice, when we used to do the voice call into like 911 centers or public safety access points, we're now introducing video and data into those access points. And, the public's not behind the firewall. They're sending in video data that could potentially contain malware, ransomware. They're susceptible to DDoS attacks. So those type of things are certainly areas that we're concerned about. And additionally, as the last panel had discussed, it's not only about the technology that we look at when we talk about interoperable communications and resiliency, it's also about the human factor, because we find out that the human factor is a big part in vulnerabilities, threats, but also just the sheer use and interoperability of communications. One of the things that we work with our partners on is we found that through engagement and interaction, 70% of like the states or excuse me, the public safety access points do not have cybersecurity training, or they don't have funding in order to address cybersecurity. So these are all the things that we're concerned about and how we help in that regard.
And do you agree with Jason? Has it been a pleasant surprise, the speed of the proliferation of 5G deployment? Do you see it reaching the emergency responder in an accelerated way?
Yes, I mean, I think the speed of it is that it's reaching the responder is beneficial. And then again, as you take in that capability, it's how do you adjust to it? How do you ensure the information flow is there, that you're able to manage the information, especially at the mass that it comes in and the high rate, because again, going back to the public safety access point, there's certainly more dispatchers within law enforcement and other first responders, but just public safety access points on my mind right now. But the speed of that information, hopefully the introduction of AI and things like that can help that decision-making process, help that information flow.
Thank you. Now, Ted, please share with us your experience at FEMA about the deployment of 5G networks. What have been the consequences, the outcomes that have pleasantly or otherwise surprised you?
Thanks for the question, and it's a privilege to be here, being invited, and to be on HSDF. Thanks Megan, who invited me again and reached out. So FEMA's mission is to help people before, during, and after disasters. And Dan Creswell, our administrator, is really brought on a people-first, people-focused approach and culture within FEMA and the agency. And so I mentioned all of that just at the outset because it's a little bit uncomfortable for me to bring this up, and a little bit awkward. But I felt just at the outset, I have to bring a little bit of correction. I may have misheard it. So it's probably I'm getting old now. And so, but I think a previous panelist had mentioned that FEMA provides disaster information from survivors to intelligence organizations. I just want to be very clear, and I probably misheard, that by statute, by regulation, by audit, we do not do that. The privacy interests of our disaster survivors in this nation is utmost. Think about a disaster survivor in Oregon or California with the wildfires, and all they have is a smoking slab of concrete and a chimney, and all they've got is electrons in a bank. So we have a great interest in protecting that survivor to be able to recover, and that is foremost in our mission. It's in our culture. We also partner with 56 states and territorial and Commonwealth governments, as well as 574 federally recognized tribes by law and statute who are treated as sovereign governments. And there's tribal legislation. We have the Stafford Act as amended, and we have tribal legislation. And so we, in our mission, we partner with them. We do not oversee our legal authorities. The 9th and 10th Amendment is still relevant. So I just want to start out with that. And I think it's going to probably be a thematic concept as the afternoon goes on, for me at least. But to get to your question, I think of what happened during Hurricane Ike in Galveston, Texas. I was there for the 10th anniversary at Texas A&M at their campus in Galveston after the anniversary with National Alliance for Public Safety, GIS. And I was there. I was running something called Microsoft Humanitarian Systems, had a patent filing, which was, they don't tell you if it's approved, but in 2015. And it's an utterly useless piece of intellectual property, I have to tell you that. Only because what it was a system of bricks that would self-federate a network for a community that was completely cut off from all internet, all cellular, for an extended period of time. Has no other use except for providing a survivor network. And I start there because there are communities like Galveston, Texas, during Hurricane Ike, and parts of Texas, certainly north of Houston and Galveston, during Hurricane Harvey, which devastated both Houston and the coastline. And these communities did not receive help. They had zero comms for a long time. Moreover, local FDs, fire departments, had no way to communicate to the next echelon of authority. So it's difficult to actually get mutual assistance, or mutual aid, as we call it in emergency management. That is where I start from. Everything else is really ancillary. If I cannot communicate, if emergency managers and fire, rescue, battalion chiefs cannot communicate, they cannot respond, and there are human consequences because of that. So in deploying 5G, I mean, in general, we are looking at, sure, we appreciate all the carrier partners that we work with. They're so important to us. We utilize multiplexing devices whenever there's a weak signal. I used to work in a company that optimized cellular networks. They call them Ns of 19, N of 23, and so forth if you work in the industry. And it'll pull in a weak signal, and it'll multiplex that with multiple SIM cards. But yet it's still very challenging to actually restore a base level of communication. I think if I could even think about the what's beyond 5G to the next gen, I think what I'm most excited about is the potential deployment of the next generation for 6G, right, which would be 5G with potential for maritime mobile augmentation or satellite augmentation within the 6G framework. That's exciting. Why is that? Because a lot of people don't know that FEMA's AOR, our area of responsibility, is about 13 time zones, extending from St. John's Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is half the year on Atlantic time. People don't know that. All the way out to Guam. And Guam is in the same time zone as Tokyo. You have to go to Narita Airport through international travel in a transit to center to be able to get to their cyber issues there as well. But to get to Guam and the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas Islands. So you remember your history. Truk, Tinian Island, where the Enola Gay took off, right? American Samoa. These Commonwealth and territorial governments and tribal, federally recognized tribal governments are absolutely the core focus of our FEMA mission to get to those who are also historically underserved. And so when it comes to EdgeComm, this topic is very important to me, whether it's a whole community resource like amateur radio. I'm an extra class ham, proud to be one, and that augments certainly some of the capabilities, but the exciting thing about the potential for satellite augmentation and maritime mobile with 6G on top of beam formation and MIMO and concentrated core, all of that edge base and all the cybersecurity elements of zero trust and non-repudiation of identity and containerization of software, all of those things that are part of immutable architecture, as Michael Perry talks about, is something that are operationally central to our mission.
Well, thank you very much for the level set on the privacy and the high degree of observance of the rules and so forth. That really is reminding me of some of the sentiment expressed by other government leaders, from Avril Haines to Admiral Mike Rogers. They talk consistently about how important it is to maintain the confidence of the public in trust in our institutions, and that we follow the rules that we set for ourselves. So I also appreciate your mentioning some of these past emergencies, Hurricane Ike and so forth. During our short conversation before, you had mentioned the Hurricane Katrina and the earthquake back in 2005 in Pakistan. And I think a lot of the wisdom comes in the form of the narratives of having been through these past disasters. And so I would ask you another question about the NextG and the current 5G deployments. What would you consider to be, based on this past experience, what would you consider to be the pillars for resiliency for the investments that we're making now into networks? Based on the wisdom that we've accrued going through these past disasters.
Yeah, no, it's and I think as we did our pre-call, I mentioned the circumstances around Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, devastating, especially the central areas. There's some 68 municipalities. It's sort of the old sort of Spanish city-state model. If you know the history of the island, wonderful Commonwealth. I spent a long time there, and when you, I think that the phrase would be sort of the citizenship interest in terms of technology companies as they view areas that are the most vulnerable to these sudden onset disasters like hurricanes and even earthquakes. There are seismic events in Puerto Rico, as you may know, and so I remember looking at an old tower, and this gets to the topic of local governance, and hopefully we get to explore that a bit, because more and more we're seeing risk being effectively sort of concentrated, kind of a moral hazard up at the federal level. But as you know, it's often difficult for us policy-wise to be very nimble at the national level. So whatever we can do to strengthen local governance. So I saw this particular cell tower. It was on private land, broken chain link fence. There's a kind of a dog there just as a guard dog, but it was more like a just not much. And it's kind of modern technology, right? So you have sort of a wire line to the radios where you don't have combiners. That's something that I remember from my old companies, where you have a combiner, where you have multiple transmitters at the base station, these huge things, aluminum vanes, and then it goes up a hard line, and the antennas are up on the tower itself. Now it's not. It's like a multi-tenant data center, right? That's an average tower, very expensive, and big companies like Crown Castle and American Tower and SBC and so forth, right? And but the hard line was not ever removed from that tower. So when the wind load from the hurricane, from Maria came, it took the whole thing down and the monitor. And so all you had left were some working slices of the base stations, and that's all you had. And I took pictures of it with the huge hard line taking down that tower. And that impression has really stayed with me for quite some time. And it's not a knock on the capability of the islands or the private carriers there, not at all. But it got me thinking more and more about what's good, what's left on an island in terms of either towers, even local government towers that are not being used, and how quickly we can stand up infrastructure. And it's not so much the bandwidth or the speed, but it's the speed of installation. It's the speed of response and being able to set something up very quickly. And that, I think, is something that we could explore where there's public-private partnership. It's a very difficult thing because you're talking about home rule states in general, sovereign governments, and local zoning and local governance. But how we strengthen that seems to be part of that equation, especially in a very hard-hit coastal community, of which even CONUS, if you look at our Gulf states, some of our most vulnerable communities are right on the coast, and the ones that are least served and the ones who who are not very wealthy, quite frankly, and need our support as a nation.
I would suspect that that tower was not a 222H certified tower with that.
You have NATE, right? You have the National Association of Tower Erectors and standards that we all subscribe to, right? And when it comes to infrastructure.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, talking about pillars for resiliency of these networks, they need to be functioning when disaster strikes. You have emergency networks, special purpose networks, but in truth, every bit of infrastructure is fair game.
Right.
In preventing and detecting and responding and so forth. Would you, Jason, would you have any thoughts about the pillars for resiliency?
Yeah, I think about really the foundation of a resilient infrastructure is the supply chain. So we've seen a lot of negative press around supply chain in the past few years, and rightly so, from things like shortages and just being able to physically get equipment, but also compromise in the supply chain, like with SolarWinds. So we're, I think, a lot more aware of both the hardware and software side of the supply chain. In response to that, we saw the administration, the executive orders that came out last year, EO 14017, more on the hardware side, and EO 14028 on the software assurance side of things. So both of those are really important. Sometimes we can do a lot of interesting, complicated, technologically advanced things, to secure software, make the chips more secure, build in encryption there. But sometimes it comes back to the basics of you have to be able to get the equipment. And one of the things that Ericsson did, about 5 years ago now, there was an earthquake or some kind of event like that in Southeast Asia, and it disrupted a plant there that we were using for basebands. And we decided back then, this could be a problem if something like this happens again. We cannot be reliant on a single source supply chain. So we made the decision then to move our supply chains and manufacturing closer to our different market areas. And now we have manufacturing capability in Brazil, in Estonia, in Mexico, and right here in the US. We built a $100 million 5G smart factory in Lewisville, Texas. And within that factory, we're actually using 5G, a private network 5G in the factory. So we're, like say, we use 5G to build 5G. So all the robots that are running around on the floor in the clean room, they're all 5G powered robots and things that are delivering all the components. We have in that factory, it's the longest, what's it called, a surface mount chain, I think in the world actually, that provides the component level assembly portion for where we assemble all the basebands. So,
Okay.
That's the basics of, well, let's build more stuff closer to where it needs to go. And that's helped a lot. So during COVID, we actually were able to still deliver 500,000 radios last year, which is amazing, despite the disruptions of COVID.
And Vincent, what are your thoughts about resiliency of the emergency networks? Pillars pillars of resiliency as we go forward.
So with regards to pillars of resiliency, especially in emergency communications, it deals with everything from national security to emergency preparedness all the way to public safety, so the whole gamut. There's several areas as we think through resiliency. One is we have a great partnership with what we call SAFECOM, which is certainly it's an association of about 70 subject matter experts from around the nation, both in public safety, national security, across all governments, but also some of our public safety associations. And also our relationship, as Ted was mentioning, I think earlier, talking about our interaction with the states and their resiliency to respond to emergency situations. And if you've seen one state, you've seen one state. So we have another organization, the statewide interoperability coordinators within each of the states that help us address issues such as the 5G rollout and how it's going to impact their emergency communications, and how do you ensure that you have a plan in place, a governance structure in place that will bring in the necessary not only equipment but personnel and other interdependencies for resilient communications, especially as you talk about portable platforms and things of that nature. And that's where we work hand in glove with FEMA, as in all instances. The other thing I would mention is, although we deal a lot in, as I mentioned earlier, some of the human factors, the planning and governance, we also have capabilities that we do sponsor. And one that's been around for a while is priority services. And it's mainly has been a voice priority services. So with regards to priority voice communications, how you get in the front of the line during a congested time frame or period. But what's exciting, especially with 5G, is we're now moving forward and looking at priority services when it comes to video, data, and information services. So that is something that's pretty exciting to look at as we talk about how do you provide whether it's resiliency or other systems in order to make sure that you have those communications all the time. So there are areas that we're working in right now, and 5G is transformational when you talk about video, data, and information services.
I like your point about the personnel, because the thing that gets most of the attention in the supply chain shortages is the hardware, and we often forget about the need to keep the flow of trained specialists focused on the mission. So to continue on the theme about supply chains, let's talk a little bit about Made in the USA. And for anyone, if this presents too hot of a potato, you're welcome to pass. But the Biden administration not only has not undone the Trump era America First preferences for equipment vendors, but it's also raised the minimums. The amount of U.S. content is defined by cost. I think it was something like 50%, and now it's above 70 to qualify for certain federal incentives.
It's 55%.
It's 55, okay.
For the IIJA, yeah.
And so the question is, how does, Ericsson, of course, is, as you say, is now in Texas. Mm-hmm. So that's very convenient. And I think it's also a good thing that we're not just reshoring, but we're friendshoring where we can. Now that, and it's certainly a positive development that Sweden is on the threshold of NATO. But let me get to the question, how, in general, how does one balance the desire to stimulate the development of interoperable components in the USA with the need to serve communities today with the supply chain constrained times that we live in?
Well, as I said before, like a balanced supply chain is really important. It's important to not have, like, you don't want to trade one risk for another and say, well, by moving things out of manufacturing in somewhere like China, if you just relocate it to the U.S., if that's your only place of manufacture, you still have a single source supply chain problem. You know, we still have earthquakes, tornadoes, fires, other natural disasters that can still impact us here. So I think it's important that as we move towards, not move towards, we really have been in this global economy space for a while now. We need a global supply chain as well. But that comes from having a trusted supply chain with allies, with allied countries that are like-minded and democratic nations. And that's why we've built manufacturing plants at various other parts of the world too, not just in the US. So I think that's important.
Thank you. And Ted, you mentioned the number of time zones you're covering. Certainly, we share some of those time zones with other countries. What are your thoughts about international cooperation?
I was just inspired by what Vincent just said. I'm really proud of our partners in the department. You know, CISA really has taken a wonderful lead. Just thinking about our colleagues in Border Patrol, ICE, I know the CTO of ICE really well, and we've really supported each other to really increase the cybersecurity just internally with standards. In Puerto Rico, for example, the infrastructure after the onset of the Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, a number of IS or infrastructure support folks came in. They were building lots of pieces through both grants. It's the old OEC, but it's also it's called ECD now, of course. You know, with the border crisis, right? I mean, the amount of care that the department has extended to those who cross the border, all the way to the Operation Allies Welcome with the Afghan refugees coming in, being processed, and having one of our lead regional administrators, a federal coordinating officer, as the lead on that team, together with the entire emergency with regards to COVID and protecting our operations with PPE and the vaccination effort with the National Guard, with the governors. I mean, there's just an immense history of partnership within the department. So I just want to start out with that and commend all of our operational partners, the Coast Guard, when you think back to Deepwater Horizon, and then the SWICs that were mentioned, and the important interagency at the federal, at the state level, local level coordination that the SWICs administer is really just wonderful for us as an agency. So we deeply appreciate the unity of effort within the department. I think on supply chain, sure, it's less, you know, as it's semiconductor fabrication that it's onshore is not as important as the overall packaging, right? In terms of PCB fabrication and the labor costs to do that. And, you know, yeah, there's a race on sub 3 nanometer lithography and et cetera. But I try to look at this broadly, even in standards. I mean, we talk a lot about cellular and, you know, FirstNet, and we're here at AT&T, right? So tower preemption, there's just NTIA and the work they've been doing have been so critical. But I try to look broadly about that. For example, just in Wi-Fi, for example, augmenting, we're in Wi-Fi 6, but just recently, you know, today's news was big news, right? Broadcom acquires VMware. Right. But what a lot of people don't know is they just released the first Wi-Fi 7 chipsets. So you're now seeing more capacity potentially with Wi-Fi 7. So my question is always, how does that factor in terms of multi-core in, you know, that 5G has been sort of building out? And I have to find out what's good, what remains, what's good, what can I quickly get together and assemble if we had another Galveston event, and what if we had another Maria event or an Irma event that pretty much sliced through the Florida Keys in the midsection, north of Key West.
And I appreciate your mentioning standards as an enabler of rapid response. I lead a not a very well-known organization, the International Committee for IT Standards, that happens to represent virtually every federal agency and almost every major tech company in JTC1. We're the U.S.'s gateway to the ISO and IEC world for the standards committees for these important critical and emerging technologies like AI and quantum computing and so forth. And I know that on the DoD side, it's the use of commercial standards that is highlighted as the way to get functionality within a time frame that's going to make a difference into the hands of the warfighter, and in your case, into the hands of the emergency responder. So the standards are a really important element of all this, and I have a question for you about that. But before I ask the question, I'd like to remind the audience and the people that are participating remotely that if you have a question, we want to bring you into the conversation. We're almost to the part of our panel where we're going to take the question. So if you have a question you've been thinking of, write it down and click submit, because Megan will bring them in just a moment. So my standards question is this: do you agree that the lack of participation in standards by the U.S., including federal agency stakeholders, represents a kind of a weak flank, especially when we compare our system to other countries' systems where they will, stroke a $10 million check and centrally command people to participate in the international standards process? And if so, what do we do about it?
Yeah. Sounds like a tricky question because I got to be careful what I say. No, but I think the modern world, I work for the CIO, who is the authorizing official for all systems within FEMA. And what we are now, and I think what you're finding within government is a move towards a risk-based framework, right? The risk management framework. So you're looking at risk narratives, which means you have a new era, what's called the 3PAO, or the Third Party Assessment Organization. So we have benefited for a long time from NIST and Department of Commerce, right? So the 853, I can't, heaven help me that I know all these numbers. I've just only been in the government for 10 years. And FIPS 201-3 for, FIDO, universal two-factor for non-repudiation of identity. You have, 4300A common controls, inherited controls, all of that. But what you're also finding are a growth of international bodies. Everything from, obviously, FedRAMP with GSA. You've got DoD CMMC. You have ISO 9000. You have HIPAA. You have a lot of standards bodies, fintech, even financial, U.S. Treasury standards and international standards. I think what's happened is a shift away from pure compliance or compliance-based to one that is both assessed risk and then how that risk register is now the basis for an authorization to operate. And I think the safety valve, I think, for us in the federal government, quite frankly, is the fact that you have to be constantly vigilant and look at, so how we measure cybersecurity within cloud computing, right? It's not about whether you are auditing in a passive sort of scanning of your system, but you're looking at configuration drift and drift detection. You're looking at exceedance values in terms of your state and are there significant state changes? That's a greater indication of compromise or indicators of compromise. So I think and that's where, machine learning and AI can come into that. I think it's the same way. How do we audit a supply chain? The sort of the obvious answer is to look at state and take a state snapshot and then look at deviations or exceedance values that are statistically significant, where you can then say, well, based on that, what's the auto remediation? So it's your classic sort of SIM SOAR, right? What is your security orchestration automated response to a security incident event manager? It's your classic sort of endpoint cybersecurity that you would normally do in cloud computing, for example. I think the goal is towards this idea of immutability. There's certain things that, again, quoting Michael Perry, he's one of my favorites. He uses examples like domain-driven design or Git, finite state machines, where you effectively are Git repositories or containers that are cryptographically hashed. That level of introspection is kind of where we are at. And you're measuring almost like a lymphatic system, the net whole, and looking at that health and looking at different ways to contest A team, B team, bug bounties. I know the department's doing that right now. I think CISA's doing an amazing job leading that with S&T. These kinds of things where we are actually doing active pen testing against state pictures is kind of where the best practice currently is, right?
And all I can say to that is that your breadth of knowledge is indicative as to why the standards system that we have works. We bring experts together, and they focus together, not in sound bites, but in going deep into the experience and breadth of knowledge that's required. All right, I think we're ready for.
Yeah, so we've got a couple questions from the audience, and just as a reminder, if anyone here has a question, I see I'll come up to you next. But one question, we had a couple people ask, sort of, given all of your efforts with the first responder community and state and local law enforcement authorities, what are some of the biggest interoperability challenges we should be thinking about when it comes to wireless technologies?
Interoperability challenges.
Interoperability challenges. So I'm going to give another shout out to, as Ted mentioned, not only the other components and partners within CISA, but our other federal agencies as well, FCC, NTIA. We work hand in hand across the federal agencies. But I will go back to SAFECOM and our statewide interoperability coordinators as we talk about interoperability challenges. And there is something that's produced by SAFECOM that's actually called the SAFECOM Continuum that discusses the major components of achieving interoperability. And it talks through several different pillars that are the major challenges. One is ensuring that you have a governance structure around, not just the technology, but the governance structure around it, whether it's a statewide interoperability coordination board or government board, but understanding how that information flow or the information is to flow. It's also about doing training and exercises. As you look at training and exercises, it's about planning and standard operating procedures. And the reason I'm mentioning these as things that we have to pay attention to and work on is because on the other side of the coin, they're not being done. And that's those big challenges. And it's also about usage. As you look at your systems, and as you go through your responses, are you only using it for drills, or are you actually utilizing it on day-to-day operations? Because anything that you do day-to-day easily translates into an emergency. And in many respects, our relationship with FEMA, everything that you do day-to-day, when the emergency happens, it hopefully translates into the emergency response as we look at a major incident.
I see we have a gentleman from S&T. Apologies, I'm not sure your name offhand, but go ahead and use the microphone.
Sure. Sridhar Cowdy, not so much questions, but key observations. So one, I give kudos to Vincent for pointing out the human in the middle. How much data can a first responder consume? And realistically, we can deliver all the data to the edge, but he's got to be able to process it. And that flows not only to the responder, but NG911. So, we're trying to tackle and understand that those poor operators who are traumatized by phone calls are now going to be traumatized with video and pictures and other things, in addition to the spoofing issue. So clearly we have to understand and really look at the AI and the machine learning to deliver the data that they need when they need it, at the consumable bytes that they can actually absorb it. So that's one key point. On the standards and interoperability, it is a mess. we in public safety are now recreating all the problems we had with land mobile radio. We have push-to-talk applications that are not standardized, not compliant, and not interoperable. So we, within DHS, our ICE can't talk to Coast Guard, that can't talk to CBP. They've all gone with different non-standard push-to-talk applications. In addition to that, you've got IoT devices that every single vendor is building their own proprietary systems. What you need is some sort of fabric for interoperability for the IoT devices so that the data can be absorbed, consumed, and then displayed on incident command dashboards so that the incident commander can actually do things for public safety and make it actionable. And the third thing I would like to thank you to you, Mr. Okada, is that you were talking about, coverage. We sort of jumped the gun and jumped to 5G. Well, there's Border Patrol agents as well as Coast Guard agents that are looking for any G. A single G would be probably okay for them. So we keep in mind that coverage and cost have to be part of the equation in order to make it sustainable in the long run. So just my points on those.
I'd like to chime in on that about the coverage and cost aspect,
Sure.
because so Ericsson's been working closely with AT&T and other partners for a while on the digital divide issue and trying to bridge that gap for, well, all of the U.S., not just first responders. But you're absolutely right that there's still tremendous coverage gaps and broadband usage gaps, which creates an economic divide for people, for those with broadband access and those without. It's becoming this wide gulf now. So as the administration has rolled out different incentive programs and infrastructure programs, and we know a lot of money is going to be flowing, there's questions to be answered there of how do we best funnel those funds to the right places? What's the most efficient use of that? And in some cases, it might be wireline. It might be traditional, let's dig a trench and run fiber. In other cases, maybe not. And actually, in many cases, fixed wireless access, we're getting wireline speeds at a wireless level now. So if we can put in a tower in a neighborhood and used fixed wireless access in millimeter wave to connect that neighborhood, we can do that much faster and a lot more efficiently and cheaper than it would be to try and run fiber everywhere. We do have a lot of dark fiber still in the U.S., so we should use some of that, of course. But in a lot of places that aren't connected yet, especially rural environments, fixed wireless is going to be very helpful for those communities.
Sure. And just one final quick question from our virtual audience, and then I'll turn it back to you, David, for maybe final thoughts from your panel. But someone was curious if DHS is partnering with any consortium or industry groups around utilizing OTA contract authority to spearhead 5G prototypes or solutions. And if the answer to that's no, that's okay too. I just wanted to put that out there.
The unknown for me.
Well, I can talk about that a little bit, actually, because we're working closely with DHS and there's a few different areas. So one would be in the SCRIM task force, Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. That's headed up by DHS, but it's a combination of 20 different representative companies from the IT sector, 20 from the comm sector, and then 20 different federal agencies. And that has been a tremendous success story that really I haven't seen anything like it in a long time. We're used to doing kind of like standards work or best practices work in all these little silos. That is an environment where we've been able to get together, and we're not making standards, we're making like guidebooks. Here's how to go do a vendor risk template, for example. So I think we need to do more of that. We have worked closely with DHS on a number of different topics around 5G, ESF, the Enduring Security Framework. So NSA is chiming in on that as well, looking at various topics of 5G like network slicing, Open RAN, software-defined networking, software assurance, all in the context of 5G. So I would say DHS has actually got their fingers in a lot of different consortia and fora, and it's been very helpful.
And to echo what Jason's saying, as we talk about guidebooks and information flow, that is something that CISA does work in, especially within 5G. And it is about the information flow. It's about getting our partners together, whether it's industry, whether it's associations, whether it's other government entities, to ensure that that there is that information flow with regards to best practices, lessons learned, and everything as we were just mentioning with regards to 5G. So,
Thank you for joining us. Today's program was produced by the Homeland Security and Defense Forum and made possible by the support of our partners AT&T, Dell Technologies, Ericsson, and Intel. Video of today's show and other HSDF original programs can be found on the HSDF YouTube channel. Subscribe today and enjoy hours of insightful policy discussions. Stay tuned for information on additional HSDF symposiums in 2022, including the evolution of federal cybersecurity on June 22nd and the HSDF Hybrid Cloud Symposium in September. For more information, visit www.hsdf.org.